The secret Schopenhauer understood about solitude wasn't that it breeds misery, but that it reveals a profound truth most people spend their lives running from. In his quiet contemplation, away from the cacophony of social demands, Schopenhauer glimpsed something that modern society desperately tries to hide, that those who embrace solitude, especially women who do so against immense cultural pressure, access a form of spiritual power that others never experience. These women possess what Schopenhauer might have called an uncommon clarity, a vision unclouded by the endless parade of desires that keeps most humans trapped in cycles of achievement and disappointment. Today, I'll share with you Schopenhauer's insights into why women who love solitude possess this rare spiritual energy, how society systematically tries to disconnect them from this power, and why understanding this hidden truth might completely transform how you view your own relationship with solitude, whether it fills you with peace or terrifies you to your core. Solitude has always carried a stigma, but for women, this stigma becomes something far more potent, a kind of social punishment. While men who seek solitude are often romanticized as brilliant thinkers, women who do the same have historically been labeled as witches, spinsters, or socially defective. What Schopenhauer recognized, long before modern psychology caught up, was that this intense social resistance wasn't accidental. It emerges because women who cultivate comfort with solitude develop a rare form of independence that threatens established power structures, an independence of mind that Schopenhauer believed was essential to piercing through the veil of illusion that keeps most humans perpetually dissatisfied. The story of Schopenhauer's own relationship with solitude offers us profound insight. Despite being one of the 19th century's most influential philosophers, Schopenhauer lived much of his life in relative isolation. In his quiet apartment in Frankfurt, accompanied only by his poodles, he developed the philosophical system that would later influence figures from Nietzsche to Freud. "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone," he wrote, "and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." What's remarkable is that Schopenhauer came to this conclusion despite being raised in an era when social connections were considered the height of cultivation. Something in his experience had shown him that true wisdom required stepping away from the constant noise of social expectations. What Schopenhauer discovered, and what many women who embrace solitude intuitively understand, is a rarely discussed truth, that the human will, our endless desiring, is the source of our suffering. Each desire we fulfill immediately gives birth to another, keeping us on a treadmill of wanting that never leads to lasting satisfaction. Society exploits this vulnerability by constantly telling us that the next purchase, the next relationship, or the next achievement will finally make us happy. But women who cultivate comfort with solitude often develop a unique immunity to these promises. They learn to see through the veil of Maya, the illusion that perpetuates suffering, because solitude provides the space needed to observe how the mind generates desire after desire without end. This brings us to the disturbing aspect of Schopenhauer's insight. Society has a vested interest in keeping women afraid of solitude. A woman comfortable in her own company is harder to manipulate through social approval or disapproval. She is less likely to purchase products promising to make her more acceptable to others. She is less willing to engage in relationships that diminish her essence. The market economy, which thrives on insecurity and constant wanting, sees the woman who loves solitude as a dangerous anomaly, someone who has partially freed herself from the wheel of desire that keeps consumption patterns predictable and profitable. Historically, we can trace how this fear has been systematically cultivated. In medieval Europe, women who lived alone were often accused of witchcraft. In the Victorian era, unmarried women were pathologized as hysterical or melancholic. Even today, research shows that women face more negative judgment for engaging in solitary activities than men do. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Consumer Research found that women who dine alone are perceived as less socially desirable than men who do the same, despite reporting similar levels of enjoyment from the experience. This consistent social punishment across centuries isn't coincidental. It reflects a deep cultural anxiety about women who find contentment outside the approved channels of family and social integration. Schopenhauer's concept of the will helps explain why solitude generates such powerful transformation. According to his philosophy, the will is an impersonal driving force that manifests through human desire. It cares nothing for our happiness, only for our continuation and striving. Most people remain unconscious of how this will operates through them, constantly generating new desires once old ones are satisfied. But in solitude, when external stimulation is removed, we have the opportunity to witness this process directly. We can see how a satisfied desire immediately gives way to new wanting, how achievement brings only momentary relief before dissatisfaction returns. This direct perception, what Buddhists might call mindfulness, allows for the development of a different relationship with desire itself. For women who embrace solitude, this creates a fundamental shift in consciousness that manifests as that rare spiritual energy others can sense but rarely understand. They develop what Schopenhauer called a genuine indifference to the promises that keep others frantically pursuing the next thing. This isn't depression or disengagement, quite the opposite. It's a profound freedom that allows for a more authentic engagement with life, one unclouded by the desperate need for validation or acquisition. These women often report a sense of spaciousness in their experience, a capacity to appreciate beauty more directly, and relationships that are chosen rather than needed. The danger in this process lies in how disruptive it can be to one's previous identity and social connections. As a woman begins to experience the freedom that comes with embracing solitude, she often finds herself increasingly alienated from friends and family who remain caught in conventional patterns. Relationships based on mutual reinforcement of insecurities or shared distraction from existential realities suddenly feel hollow. This can lead to a painful period of isolation that's often misinterpreted as evidence that solitude itself is harmful, when it's actually just the necessary discomfort of transition. This brings us to a secondary problem that Schopenhauer identified. Even those who intellectually understand the benefits of solitude often resist it emotionally. We are, after all, social creatures with deep evolutionary programming that equates social rejection with danger. Women especially have been conditioned to see their value primarily through the eyes of others. This creates an uncomfortable paradox where the path to freedom requires walking through precisely what we've been taught to fear most. The woman embracing solitude must confront not just external judgment, but also her own internalized belief that something is wrong with her for seeking time alone. The psychological impact of this transition can be profound. Many women report initial periods of intense anxiety when first cultivating solitude. Without the constant validation and distraction of social interaction, suppressed emotions and unprocessed thoughts rise to the surface. Schopenhauer would view this as the necessary purification process through which one begins to see how the will has been operating through unconscious patterns of desire and aversion. As one woman who embraced solitude after a divorce told me, "The first few months of living alone were terrifying. I didn't know who I was without constant reference to others. But then something shifted, and I discovered a sense of peace I'd never known was possible." This pattern of initial discomfort, followed by profound release, repeats across countless stories of women who have embraced solitude. It represents what Schopenhauer called the denial of the will, not a nihilistic rejection of life, but a liberation from unconscious bondage to desiring. This liberation doesn't happen all at once, but occurs in stages, each bringing greater clarity and freedom from the psychological patterns that keep most people trapped in cycles of wanting and temporary satisfaction. What's particularly fascinating is how this phenomenon manifests across cultures. From the desert mothers of early Christianity to Japanese Buddhist nuns, from contemporary women choosing to remain single to those who simply carve out regular periods of solitude within conventional lives, there appears to be a universal pattern in how solitude transforms female consciousness when embraced rather than feared. Across these diverse contexts, women report similar experiences: an initial period of disorientation, followed by a profound recalibration of values, and ultimately the emergence of an unusual clarity and equanimity that others find both attractive and somewhat mysterious. The systematic patterns Schopenhauer observed in this process can be understood through 4 distinct stages that women typically move through as they develop a healthy relationship with solitude. The first stage might be called resistant solitude. Here a woman finds herself alone through circumstance rather than choice, perhaps after a breakup, the death of a partner, or a move to a new city. During this phase, solitude is experienced primarily as lack and loneliness. The woman feels incomplete without others, and may frantically seek to fill her time with social media, dating apps, or other distractions. She interprets her discomfort as evidence that something is wrong with her situation, rather than as the natural withdrawal symptoms of dependency on external validation. Schopenhauer would identify this as the will in its most transparent form, creating suffering through attachment to the belief that happiness lies in something external to oneself. The second stage can be called instrumental solitude. The woman begins to recognize certain benefits to being alone: productivity, freedom from compromise, space for creativity, but still views solitude primarily as a means to other ends. She might say things like, "I enjoy my alone time because it helps me recharge for social situations," or "living alone lets me focus on my career." While this represents progress, Schopenhauer would point out that solitude is still being justified through its utility rather than valued for itself. The will is still operating, just in a more subtle form, using solitude as yet another vehicle for achievement and acquisition. The third stage marks a significant shift and might be called essential solitude. Here, the woman begins to value solitude for its own sake, recognizing it as essential to her well-being rather than instrumental to other goals. She no longer feels compelled to justify her need for alone time to others or herself. During this phase, many women report a profound shift in their relationship with themselves. They begin to experience their own company as complete rather than lacking. As one woman in this stage told me, "I stopped waiting for my real life to begin when someone important came along. I realized this is my real life and it's already full." Schopenhauer would recognize this as the beginning of seeing through the veil of Maya, the illusion that fulfillment lies in something outside oneself. The fourth and final stage could be called transcendent solitude. Few women reach this stage, but those who do develop what others perceive as that rare spiritual energy, a quality of presence that seems simultaneously deeply peaceful and intensely alive. In this stage, solitude and connection no longer appear as opposites, but as complementary facets of the same reality. The woman moves between time alone and time with others with equal ease, bringing the clarity cultivated in solitude into her relationships. She no longer seeks validation or completion from others because she's found a more fundamental completeness within herself. Schopenhauer might describe this as having pierced through the principium individuationis, the illusion of separate selfhood that keeps most people trapped in cycles of desire and fear. The integration process between these stages isn't linear or automatic. Many women oscillate between stages or become stuck at particular transitions. The movement from resistant to instrumental solitude often happens naturally as the immediate pain of unwanted aloneness gives way to the discovery of its practical benefits. However, the transition from instrumental to essential solitude represents a more fundamental shift in consciousness that many women find challenging. It requires letting go of the belief that one's value lies in productivity or achievement, a belief deeply reinforced by modern capitalism. Similarly, the movement from essential to transcendent solitude involves a spiritual maturation that's rare in our distraction-filled culture. The dangers in this process are significant and worth acknowledging honestly. The first danger is mistaking isolation for solitude. Isolation is imposed and disconnecting. True solitude is chosen and ultimately enhances one's capacity for authentic connection. Women who have been traumatized by relationships sometimes retreat into isolation as a form of self-protection, reinforcing patterns of fear and avoidance, rather than developing the positive aspects of solitude that Schopenhauer identified. This isn't the path to freedom, but another form of bondage. Another danger lies in using philosophical justifications to avoid addressing genuine attachment wounds or social anxiety. Some women intellectualize their fear of intimacy by framing it as a spiritual preference for solitude. Schopenhauer himself might have fallen into this trap, given his notoriously difficult relationships with women throughout his life. True comfort with solitude doesn't diminish one's capacity for intimacy. It enhances it by removing the desperate need that often corrupts genuine connection. Perhaps the most subtle danger is spiritual bypassing, using the language of transcendence to avoid dealing with practical realities. The woman who claims to have transcended social needs while secretly suffering from loneliness isn't experiencing the liberation Schopenhauer described, but is caught in a new form of self-deception. Authentic spiritual development through solitude includes an unflinching honesty about one's actual experience, not an escape into spiritual ideals. Let me share some negative and positive examples that illustrate these distinctions more clearly. Consider the case of Eleanor, a 42-year-old woman who described herself as embracing solitude after a series of painful breakups. She lived alone, had few friends, and spent most of her time reading spiritual texts and meditating. On the surface, this might appear to be the solitude Schopenhauer advocated. However, upon deeper conversation, it became clear that Eleanor's solitude was actually a fortress built from fear. She admitted that she felt intense anxiety at the thought of dating again, and had convinced herself that her isolation was spiritually superior to those desperate women who need relationships. This isn't the transcendence of desire, but its repression, not freedom from the will, but its manifestation through fear and avoidance. Contrast this with the case of Maria, a 67-year-old woman who had been happily single for over 2 decades after an early marriage and divorce. Maria maintained deep friendships and was beloved by her nieces and nephews, but she also fiercely protected her solitude. "I love people," she explained, "but I've discovered that I become my truest self in silence and solitude. That's where I connect with something larger than myself." Maria regularly traveled alone, took herself to concerts and restaurants without apology, and felt no need to justify her lifestyle to anyone. Her solitude wasn't a reaction against connection, but a positive choice that enhanced the quality of her engagement with others when she chose to be social. This represents the kind of liberation through solitude that Schopenhauer described. Not an escape from life, but a deeper immersion in its essence. The personal transformation that women experience through embracing solitude typically unfolds through several distinct stages. The first stage often begins with confronting the cultural messaging that has made solitude seem frightening or undesirable. Many women report a period of deprogramming where they recognize how deeply they've internalized the belief that their value depends on being desired, needed, or validated by others. This recognition can be painful, but also liberating, the beginning of what Schopenhauer would call seeing through the veil of Maya. The second stage typically involves developing new capacities for self-regulation. Women who have relied on others for emotional stabilization, whether through reassurance, distraction, or validation, must learn to navigate their emotional landscapes independently. Many report initially feeling overwhelmed by emotions that were previously diluted through constant social interaction. One woman described it as learning to be my own emotional home rather than constantly seeking shelter in others. This stage corresponds to what Schopenhauer called developing inner fortitude, the ability to maintain equanimity regardless of external circumstances. The third stage often brings a profound shift in values. Women report becoming less interested in acquisition and achievement and more drawn to experiences of depth and meaning. Material possessions that once seemed essential lose their allure. Social approval feels increasingly irrelevant compared to inner authenticity. This represents what Schopenhauer described as the quieting of the will, not its complete silencing, but a significant diminishment of its power to drive behavior through desire and fear. The fourth stage frequently manifests as a new quality of attention, both to one's inner experience and to the world. Women in this stage often report heightened sensitivity to beauty in ordinary moments and a deeper capacity to listen to others without the need to insert themselves. "I feel more present," one woman said. "When I'm with people now, I'm actually with them, not constantly thinking about how they're perceiving me." Schopenhauer would recognize this as the fruit of seeing through the principium individuationis, the illusion of separation that keeps most people trapped in self-reference and comparison. The fifth stage, which emerges gradually and may never be complete, involves a fundamental reorientation towards suffering, both one's own and others. Women who have moved through the previous stages often develop what Schopenhauer considered the highest human virtue, compassion, Having seen through the mechanisms of desire that create suffering in themselves, they recognize the same patterns in others without judgment. This doesn't manifest as pity, which Schopenhauer criticized as condescending, but as a clear-eyed recognition of shared human vulnerability. "I feel less separate from others' pain," one woman explained. "Not in a way that overwhelms me, but in a way that connects us at a level deeper than personality." Throughout these stages of transformation, certain warnings and traps bear repeating. The first trap is using solitude as escape rather than engagement. True solitude involves facing oneself honestly, which is often more challenging than facing others. The woman who fills her alone time with endless distraction, whether through television, social media, or other forms of numbing, isn't experiencing the solitude Schopenhauer valued, but is simply avoiding relationship in a different form. A second trap is intellectualizing the process rather than embodying it. Some women, particularly those with academic backgrounds, get caught in reading about solitude, writing about solitude, and thinking about solitude without actually developing a lived practice of comfortable aloneness. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the will operating through the intellect, using concepts as a buffer against direct experience. A third trap is using solitude as a form of passive aggression or punishment toward others. The woman who withdraws into apparent solitude to make a partner or family member miss her or appreciate what she does isn't experiencing authentic solitude, but is engaged in a complex social manipulation. True solitude, as Schopenhauer conceived it, isn't a tactic in relationship, but a genuine turning toward oneself. The maintenance of this transformed relationship with solitude requires ongoing practice, especially in a culture that constantly pulls in the opposite direction. Many women find that they need regular solitude rituals to maintain their hard-won clarity. These might include daily meditation, solo walks in nature, regular retreats, or simply protecting certain days or hours for being completely alone. What these practices share is their intentionality. Solitude is no longer what happens by default when others aren't available, but is actively chosen and protected. Higher integration of this relationship with solitude typically manifests in how a woman engages with the broader world. Rather than withdrawing permanently into hermit-like isolation, women who have developed this rare spiritual energy often find themselves engaging more authentically in their communities, work, and relationships. Having freed themselves from the desperate need for validation that distorts most human interaction, they're able to offer something unusual in their engagements, a quality of presence unclouded by hidden agendas or unconscious neediness. This is what others sense as that rare spiritual energy, the natural radiance of a person who has, to some degree, freed themselves from the tyranny of endless wanting. In our final reflection, it's worth considering why Schopenhauer's insights about solitude might be particularly relevant for women today. We live in an era of unprecedented connectivity, where being constantly available through technology has become the new social expectation. For women especially, who have historically borne the majority of emotional labor in maintaining relationships, this creates a unique burden. The woman who turns off her phone, who declines invitations without elaborate excuses, who chooses to spend an evening in her own company rather than responding to others' needs, she is making a countercultural choice that requires unusual clarity and courage. What Schopenhauer understood, long before the age of smartphones and social media, was that freedom begins with the willingness to hear one's own thoughts unclouded by others' opinions. For women, who have been systematically taught to prioritize others' comfort over their own truth, cultivating solitude isn't merely a lifestyle preference, it's a revolutionary act of self-reclamation. The rare spiritual energy that develops through this practice isn't supernatural or mystical in origin. It's simply the natural radiance of a person who has begun to liberate herself from the unconscious patterns of desiring and fearing that keep most humans in a state of perpetual dissatisfaction. Let's pause for a moment. As we've been exploring how Schopenhauer's insights reveal the transformative power of solitude, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever noticed how different you feel after periods of genuine solitude compared to times of isolation or loneliness? That subtle but profound difference between being alone in a way that depletes you versus being alone in a way that somehow makes you feel more whole and connected to something larger than yourself. I know it can be difficult to articulate, because our language often lacks precise words for these inner experiences. But if you're willing, leave a comment saying, "I experience true solitude when and complete it with your experience. Your reflection might be exactly what another person needs to recognize this distinction in their own life. Sometimes naming these subtle inner states is the first step to cultivating them intentionally, and Schopenhauer's philosophy gives us a framework to understand why these distinctions matter so deeply. Let's continue now with how we might practically apply these insights in our modern, hyper-connected world. The synthesis of Schopenhauer's insights about solitude with modern women's experiences reveals something both ancient and urgently contemporary, that in solitude, properly embraced, lies a path to freedom that no external achievement can provide. Women who love solitude aren't rejecting connection, they're rejecting dependence. They aren't avoiding life, they're engaging with it more directly, without the distortions that come from seeing oneself primarily through others' eyes. The rare spiritual energy others sense in these women isn't something they've acquired, but something they've uncovered by clearing away what was never truly needed. If you've recognized yourself in this exploration, if you've felt both the fear of solitude and its potential for liberation, you're not alone in this paradox. This channel offers a space for those seeking to understand these deeper patterns of human experience, not to retreat from life, but to engage with it more authentically. I invite you to subscribe, not to add another notification to your day, but to join a community of people asking these fundamental questions about what constitutes a life well lived. Every week, we explore philosophical insights like these and how they might transform our approach to the challenges of modern existence. Leave a comment sharing which aspect of Schopenhauer's view of solitude resonates most deeply with you, what stage of this relationship with solitude you currently inhabit, or what obstacles you face in embracing time alone. I read each comment personally and find that our collective wisdom often exceeds what any single perspective can offer. And if you know someone who might benefit from reconsidering their relationship with solitude, especially a woman who seems caught in cycles of seeking validation externally, consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes the most valuable gift we can offer each other is permission to trust our own experience. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore Schopenhauer's fascinating insights into how art offers temporary liberation from the endless striving of the will. Until then, remember, your comfort with solitude isn't something to apologize for or justify. It might be your greatest source of clarity in a world designed to keep you distracted from your own deepest truth.